in Central, let's see, 1 o'clock Mountain and noon Pacific. So we are ready to get started on our GISP, getting ready for the GISP webinar. My name is Matt Garricky. I work with the ERISA's Professional Education Committee, and one of our work groups is the GISP Exam Prep Work Group that supports ERISA members and really the GIS community as they look to prepare and move through the process of completing their GISP or recertifying their GISP. And so it's one of the ways in which we meet the ERISA's overall goals of providing resources and support for everybody, no matter where they're at in their GIS professional career. What we wanted to do today is have Tony Spicci, the new executive director of the GIS Certification Institute, give an overview and an explanation of what the GISP certification is and what the process is. And the timing for this is good because we do have at ERISA's GIS Pro Conference coming up in early October a full-day workshop talking about the specifically how to prepare for the GISP exam. And so one of the things we wanted to do is give an overview and make sure that folks know what the process is, and that enables the workshop at GIS Pro to focus more on the nuts and bolts of what's on the exam and guidance from folks that have worked to develop that material to help get folks up to speed. And so that's our game plan for the day. And so we'll have a presentation. If you have questions during the presentation, please put those into the chat box, and we'll try to work those in as we go through it. But we'll turn it over to you, Tony, for your presentation. Thank you all for joining us today.
Yes, well, good afternoon, everyone. Matt, thank you for the introduction. Appreciate that. And thank you, everyone, for being here. My name is Tony Spicci. I'm the new executive director of the GIS Certification Institute. I'll be the primary speaker in this presentation, but I also want to take a moment to introduce Bill Hodge, the retiring executive director of GISCI. Bill, I think, has been retiring for about a year now, and hopefully will continue to retire for at least a year or two more as we kind of transition into my new role and some of the changes that are going to be coming with additional staff as we move forward. So, and then thank you, of course, to ERISA for hosting this. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all today. So if I can get technology to work for me, I'm going to try to share my screen. And is everyone seeing the presentation? Is anyone seeing the presentation?
Nope, Tony, not seeing it yet.
Is that any better?
No. If at first you don't succeed, keep going.
How about now?
You're getting close.
It says I'm sharing a screen.
Yep, it's a black
Can
screen.
anybody
now.
see that slide?
No, we're just seeing a black screen right now. There we go.
You're in.
Okay. Well, I just got to note that my internet connection is unstable, so let's cross our fingers that this works. Do love technology. Okay, so this afternoon I'd like to talk a little bit about the GISCI and the GISP certification. If folks have questions at any point, go ahead and ask them. Probably the easiest thing to do is to send in a chat, and then I think either Trip or Matt or somebody will will let me know what your question is. I have no problem answering questions in the middle of the slideshow. I prefer to do that so we can answer questions as they come up. Real briefly, just a little bit about the GISCI. The GISCI and indeed the GIS Professional certification process began in the early 2000s. And it actually really started long before that, back in the probably 80s and even 90s with discussions. But the GISCI was a formalization of those discussions and the desire to bring about a professional certification. In 2003, the GISCI launched the GISCI Core Technical Knowledge Exam. I got ahead of myself. So the Certification Institute got started in 2003. And then in 2015, we added the Core Knowledge Exam. And so GISCI and the GISP program began with basically a portfolio as your approval process, and it evolved into a combination portfolio and knowledge exam in order to receive that certification. And so essentially anybody that is certified after 2015 has taken the exam. Now, if you were certified prior to 2015 and you recertify, you do not need to recertify with the exam. This only applies to the new folks coming in the Institute. So why certify? What is the point behind this process? So professional certification is really just a process in which an individual shows that he or she has acquired knowledge, skills, experience, and the like from a specific profession. And so certification and professional certification is not something new. The GISCI didn't create something that didn't exist. It created something for the geospatial community that hadn't existed before. And so really, if you look at most major industries, they start out with an idea, move to a technology phase, industrialization phase, and then as it begins to mature, you start seeing the professional phase. And so you see professions within the industry, which leads to the certification and the continued growth of that particular industry. And so that's where we are with the GISCI. The geospatial field, became a profession. It became widely accepted, and the certification soon followed. So why do individuals certify beyond just the geospatial folks? Probably one of the most important things I think behind certification is that it shows a demonstrated commitment to behaviors that enrich the profession. You're not simply just showing up for work every day, doing your job and going home. Folks that have certification in the professional industries are the folks that are committed to the industry or the profession. They're committed to what they do and the job that they do. And so that sets them apart. Certification also allows you to grow your professional knowledge and skill set. As you maintain your certification, you have to continue to gain educational credits. And there's a lot of different ways to do that, but essentially what you're doing is you're continuing your educational growth through a variety of different means. It differentiates you from other professionals within the industry. So within the geospatial industry, there's an older survey had about 675,000 geospatial professionals in it. It's a lot more now. We've got about 6,500 GISPs. Not everybody has this designation. And so this really does set folks apart from the folks without their professional certification. It also establishes professional credibility. You don't hand these things out to folks that can pay. You do have to go through a process. You have to take a very rigorous exam to get your GISP. That really says something about who you are and what your knowledge is. Not only are you willing to make the effort to get the certification, but you have the knowledge and the experience that allows you to do so. Again, something that sets you apart. And then finally, and what is very important to most folks, is that folks with certifications have increased earning potential. We don't have anything formalized yet, but we have seen a large number of folks that work for union shops get higher wages, either automatically associated with certification or specific to. We often see that it is a hiring incentive and can lead to a hiring bonus. And I believe the ERISA salary survey did in fact indicate that GISPs on average make more in the geospatial field than other folks. It certainly isn't all about money. but for most folks, money is very important. And this gives you an edge when it comes to salaries in the geospatial community. So what is the difference between certification and licensure? These are two things that people often confuse. And it's very important to point out the distinction, especially in the geospatial field. Right now across the United States and perhaps even worldwide, there's over 1,600 types of certifications. And they are in a myriad of different industries. In 2019, about 17% of our workforce held some type of certification or licensure. And in the geospatial community, we see that there are 4 types of certifications. They are the ASPRS Remote Sensing Certification series, the USGIF Geospatial Intelligence certification, the ESRI Technical Certification, which are unique to the products themselves, not necessarily the entire industry, and then of course the GISCI GISP. Now these are actual certifications, not licensure. The biggest difference is that a certification doesn't come with a legal authority or legal representation with that licensure. So for instance, there's no licensure board that basically manages or oversees a certification process. They only oversee licensure. And so the best example I can give you in our industry is that surveyors are actually licensed. Other examples include engineering and such. But there is a very big difference between licensure and certification, and the GISP is an actual certification. The GISP, like I said, has been around since 2003. It began very modestly and has continued to grow. The original batch of GISPs was 29, and we now have well over 10,500 GISPs that have received their certification. Not all GISPs are active. A number of folks have left the industry or retired, but that number represents the number of folks that have actually obtained their certification. We see a lot of interest in the program, typically about 200 folks sign up at the website, and we expect that this December testing period will see about 500 individuals taking the exam. Who certifies? Since the addition of the exam, we started tracking demographics, and we can see that the demographics are changing from the original portfolio certification. With our potential GISPs, we see typically 50% are in the private sector, about 35% are in the government. All levels are represented. We tend to see probably the most participation in local government, which isn't surprising because that represents the largest number of geospatial professionals. But between consulting and government, about 85% of our GIS, potential GISPs. And then academia and other rounds out the remaining 15%. So what is the process in becoming a GISP? The GIS certification requirements are twofold. One is that you have to submit and have a portfolio approved. And number two, you have to take and pass the GISCI Geospatial Core Technical Knowledge exam. With your portfolio, essentially what we're doing is asking you to meet requirements in education, experience, and contributions to the profession. Initial GIS applicants have to accumulate 150 points in the portfolio section, and they get to draw from the entirety of their career. So basically everything up to the point of submission on that portfolio. We ask that all GISPs read, fully understand, and sign an ethics statement. And that is required of all GISPs, both folks that are becoming GISPs for the first time, as well as our recertification folks. If you submit and pass your portfolio, turn in your ethics statement, and pass the Geospatial Core Technical Knowledge exam, you will become a GISP, and you will be given a 3-year certification period. At the end of the 3-year period, you are required to recertify to keep your certification active. With the recertification process, the exam goes away. You still have to sign an ethics statement, and then you submit a portfolio, very similar to the one that you submit for the initial certification. But at this point, we only require 24 points in the portfolio, because your portfolio is going to draw from the most recent 3 years of experience. So you don't have as many years to pull from. And if you are active in the GIS community, it is amazingly easy to recertify. And it's intentionally made that way. This is not supposed to be an onerous process. Rather, we want to make sure that you continue to learn in the profession, and that you continue to contribute to the profession through a variety of different ways. Recertification is also a 3-year process. When you initially sign up to become a GISP and go through the process, you can complete your portfolio independent of the exam. Most folks will submit that portfolio before they take the exam. There are a fair number of folks that will take the exam first, and once they pass, submit their portfolio to become a GISP. What are the costs? The GISCI charges fees to become a GISP and to maintain your certification. So the initial GISP will pay a $100 application fee, and this is a one-time fee. Once you pay it, you're good, you're in the system. Then you have to pay a portfolio review fee of $100. This too is a one-time fee. If you take the exam, you have to pay a $250 fee. That fee is paid to us, not the exam center. And that applies to anyone that's taken the test domestically. Folks that take the test internationally have to pay an additional $50. And that's just a fee associated with administering the test in a foreign country. We do work with a contractor in testing centers. We do have testing centers all over the world, just not necessarily in the most convenient places. And COVID has kind of hurt us in that regard, just because of the amount of closures and shifting availability of test centers. It's been very challenging for Bill, Hodge, and others to try to schedule these exams and get the exams taken, just because of what's going on with COVID. But chances are, if you're in a foreign country, there should be a test center somewhere within a distance of the country that you were in, as long as it's a fairly populated country. With the initial GISP, you are not charged a maintenance fee for the first year. That is included in your application fee, but you do have to begin to pay an annual maintenance fee of $95 per year. And for initial GISPs, that means your 3-year certification will require you to pay for 2 of those years at $95 a year. Once you get past your first 3-year period, then you're in recertification mode, and the fees are actually the same. They're $95 a year. We try to make it easy for folks and allow you to pay for all 3 years at a time, one single payment of $285, but folks can and often do pay for 1 year at a time. It just creates a little bit more paperwork, and just making sure that you keep your payments current if you're doing it annually.
Tony, we did have a question come in.
Yes, sir.
I already answered it in the chat, but figured putting it in the recording wouldn't be bad. So the question came from Scout Stanley. He said, can the minimum 4-year employment be a combo of full and part-time employment?
Yes, as long as it equates to 4 professional years, you can have a mixture of part-time and full-time employment.
And I'd add to that that's fairly common from the applications I've reviewed back when I was on the review committee. So I would say the norm is probably you'll have a few years of part-time and a couple of years of full-time in there. And then maybe like 5 years of part-time and 2 years of full-time to reach that 4-year equivalency.
That is correct. And it's not atypical at all in the folks that apply. Any other questions?
That's the only one we've seen so far. So guys, yeah, remember, if you've got some, put them in the chat and we'll make sure we get them answered.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the exam. So, as I said earlier, everyone that becomes a GISP at this current time has to take the exam. And so the first question is, why an exam? Why do we require this exam? Well, for starters, the exam is not atypical in the certification world. Most of us at one time or another have taken a standardized exam, whether it was the ACT or SAT or any of our other variety of certifications or tasks. An exam is a way of measuring your knowledge. And so the exam that we administer provides a measurable competency level. Really what it does is it levels the playing field, that everybody has to take an exam. And so it is basically the benchmark in which folks are going to be measured against each other. The exam has provided significantly more visibility for the certification program. You will find folks that would suggest that the certification program wasn't very robust without the exam, and I think that would be a fair statement. But the exam, in addition to the portfolio, really helped define the knowledge that's necessary to become a GISP. The exam itself is based on the GIS portfolio, and it's written to somebody with 4 years of experience in the geospatial industry. It is possible to come out of college and take the exam and pass, but the exam isn't written for college graduates. It is actually written for somebody that has experience in the geospatial profession. So for folks that have that experience, the exam becomes easier because you have gained additional knowledge and experience that will help you in the exam preparation itself. So the exam itself was written by GISPs for GISP certification. So up till now, every one of the exam questions has been written and reviewed by a GIS exam test committee. And so it is written by folks in our industry for folks in our industry. Like I said, it's composed of questions that are ideal for somebody with at least 4 years of experience. It's built upon 45 knowledge areas. And so if you look at our website, you can actually see this blueprint where we look at these knowledge, skills, and ability areas, these 45 areas. We divide them up into 10 different content areas, and that creates a blueprint. From that blueprint, we pull these exam questions. So it's very well thought out exam. These are not random questions, but rather they're questions that are basically designed to test your knowledge in all of the key areas of the geospatial industry. And the questions are updated every year, and new questions are added to the exam every year. We typically update the blueprint about every 3 to 4 years, and we will be doing new blueprint in the next year. We currently offer the exam twice a year, once in June and once in December. The exam can be taken at any point in one's career. Like I said, there is no requirement, so you can take it while you're in college. You can take it with 30 years of experience. It doesn't really matter. We don't have any screening for the exam itself. And once you submit your portfolio, you have 6 years to complete all your requirements. So once your portfolio is in, we would expect that you would take and hopefully pass the exam in that 6-year window. So let's talk a little bit more about those knowledge areas. Again, the GISP exam was started within the geospatial community. It continues to be written by folks in the geospatial community. When this exam was put together, it was done with a combination of job analysis, focus groups, and folks within the community to help them put together the blueprint or the template for the exam. When we look at the GIS knowledge areas, we see that they exceed over 400. And these are the knowledge areas that are defined by the GIS&T body of knowledge. You may be familiar with that document. And what the GISCI found was that approximately 10% of the total GIS knowledge areas were relevant to a GISP and the GIS profession across the wide range of certified professionals. And so essentially what this means is the exam focuses in on the core areas that are common to all geospatial professionals and does not go down the path of very specific industry questions. And so it is intended for the geospatial community, not necessarily one segment of it. And at this time, like I said, we have those 45 KSAs, and they basically cover the entirety of the exam. The current exam blueprint is broken down into those 10 knowledge areas, as I mentioned earlier, and you can kind of see the breakdown here. Ideally, about 10% of the questions in the exam will come from the conceptual foundations. And as you continue down that list, you can see the percentages. We don't try to make the exam a mystery to anybody. We tell you where the questions are coming from, and that's in an effort to help you study and prepare for the exam. We're not trying to trick you. We're just trying to test your knowledge. These exam blueprints are updated on a regular basis. Like I said, we will begin a new exam blueprint update. And the reason we do that is to make sure that the questions are relevant, and to make sure that we're testing knowledge that has developed since the last exam blueprint was created. I'm sure all of you know that the geospatial field is an ever-changing one. We want to make sure that our exam is relevant to the folks that are taking it at the time they're taking it. So again, this is a little more detail that shows you how we break down those 45 KSAs. You can see a couple here. The rest of these are available on our website. I would encourage you to take a look at these, as this is your blueprint for studying. And I'll talk a little bit about the practice exam that we offer. And essentially, it's an opportunity for you to test your knowledge, see where your deficiencies are, and then come back and look at this blueprint and know what and where you need to study. The exam is offered at official testing centers. We currently use a contractor called PSI, and they are the ones that essentially administer the tests that we give them. The test consists of 100 scored questions. They are all in a multiple choice format. And then we currently add 80 additional non-scored questions. And these are questions that are evaluated to be included in future editions of the exam. So this is how we build our test bank. If you've ever taken an SAT or ACT, this is exactly what they do. They give you more questions than they score. And the point is, or the reason they do that, is so that they can build those questions and build up that database so that they have relevant questions for the exam. So this means that not every exam is going to be the same. Each testing period, we develop a new exam. And we do that by pulling from those questions. When you take the exam in one of the test centers, you have a total of 4 hours to complete it. Most folks typically take about 3, but we want to make sure folks have as much time as necessary to complete the exam. And when you leave the test center, when you complete the exam, you are given an exit sheet of information, and you have to wait for your exam results. It typically takes us about 4 weeks for us to get those results back, and here's why. We actually will score the exam 3 separate times through a process called psychometrics. And the reason we do this is twofold. One is we are ensuring that there were no errors in the exam itself. Each one of these test centers is loading an exam on their computer. Mistakes can and do happen. They happen rarely, but they do happen. If there is a mistake, let's say the scoring key was put in wrong in a test center, and we didn't catch that and you passed, you'd probably be upset, and you'd be right to. And so we go through this process 3 separate times to ensure that there are no anomalies or no problems with the scoring. I know that's unfortunate because most people like myself want to know the results as soon as they exit, but we go through this process again to ensure that the exam is graded properly. And like I said, it doesn't happen very often, but mistakes do happen when computers score exams. So that's one of the reasons why we do that. And then the second reason we do that is to make sure that the test itself and all of the questions were properly administered. Very rarely do we make a mistake, but we occasionally do. And again, this process is designed to make sure all the mistakes that were made by either the scoring or the humans are eliminated from the score. And so when we give you a score, we feel very, very confident that it is the right and most accurate score. That process typically takes 4 weeks. And the last exam we administered, we did indeed deliver results exactly 4 weeks after the exam. The last exam was administered. And that is one more thing to keep in mind. When we offer the exam, we offer it over a period of 8 days. It's Saturday to Saturday. So if you take the exam on the first day, you're going to have a few extra days to wait before you get your score, simply because we don't start scoring until the exam is done. So how do you prepare for the exam? And that's probably the biggest question of today's seminar. There's not a single way to prepare for this exam. This again is an all-encompassing exam in the geospatial profession. So there's a lot of different questions. And if you've ever seen any GIS textbooks, you know that there's a ton of very, very good GIS textbooks out there. So we don't want to endorse any specific textbook. Rather, what we encourage you to do is to take a look at that blueprint and self-assess. Take the practice exam and self-assess. And then find the areas where you have your greatest weaknesses or deficiencies and start focusing in on those areas. You may be very proficient with map projections and datums and the like, and maybe don't need to spend as much time studying those as you do with geospatial operations. Everybody's different. Everybody has different knowledge base. Everybody just has different skill sets. And so rather than try to come up with one way to take the exam and one way to study for it, rather, we just give folks a blueprint for them to follow. And we found that that's actually been very, very successful. There are a lot of different opportunities, such as this workshop here today, the one that's going to be at the GIS Pro in a few weeks. There are organizations that offer training classes, such as Teach Me GIS, but we don't have a guide. We don't sell you a book that says this is how to pass the exam. We just give you that blueprint to follow. We do make resources available to you. Again, they are not the be all end all, but they are resources that are very helpful. We have an unofficial exam prep document on the website that's free to everyone and easy to get to. We talked a little bit about the third-party opportunities. There are a number of groups, ERISA included, that do put together study groups. And we actually have, it's not new this fall, it's been out for a little over a year now, we do have an official practice exam. What the practice exam is it's only 50 questions, so it's a little bit shorter. And those 50 questions actually are old retired questions that were on previous exams. So it's the real deal. We just shorten it down, we keep it to about an hour. But you're essentially it's like taking a short version of the exam, except it's in your house or wherever you choose to take the exam. You don't have to go to a testing center. It is online, it's available for $30, and that gets you 2 attempts at the exam. And so what we encourage folks to do is basically prepare, study, take the exam, then take a look at your score and see where you did well and where you did not do so well. And then use that as a blueprint to facilitate your studying, and then take it a second time and see if you improve. We found that for some folks, that's a very effective way of preparing for the exam. And indeed, when we take a look at the folks that have taken exams and look at their taken the practice exam and seen a progression where they've scored better the second time they took it, we see that a lot of those folks do very well on the actual exam itself. If nothing else, it kind of gets you in the mindset of what to expect when you walk in that test center. So if you want more information, all that's available online, and you can see the web link right there. So kind of wrapping things up, let's talk a little bit about the future direction of the GISCI and what to expect. In addition to the test, the GISCI works very hard to promote the field of GIS and its professionals. So we have a lot of different things that we work on in addition to the test. The exam is the most important thing that we do because it's the basis for certification. So we are constantly updating and upgrading the test bank for the exam, typically twice a year. And we look at updating the exam and the exam blueprint every 3 to 4 years, like I said, and we anticipate updating the blueprint next year. We're working to increase communication and involvement within the broad geospatial community. We have been working with individual groups of folks on issues unique to them, assessing opinions, and helping shape what we do and what we say as an organization based on the folks that have their GISP. We're a little bit unique in that we don't really have members. ERISA has members, NISJIC, USGIF, they all have members that they represent. We have professionals that have certifications through our institute. And so we take a little bit of a different approach in those organizations, but at the same time, we work with those organizations. We want to make sure that we are representing not only the certification, but the individuals that have it. And so we are increasing and broadening our outreach as we move forward. We're looking at increasing opportunities for our GISPs. We're contemplating and examining the feasibility of doing an entry-level exam for folks graduating from college. So if you remember earlier, I said our exam's written for folks with 4 years of experience, and you need 4 years of experience to get your GISP. We're looking now at maybe working with the community of folks that don't have that experience yet, but want to start down that path of the GISP program. We're also looking at working with our retired folks and creating a retired designation for GISPs, something that's very common in the certification world. We continue to work with, and we want to expand our student outreach. We have a internship opportunity that we make available each year through the USGS, and we do want to get students more involved. And we're also working with the private sector and private industries to help promote and increase the value of the GISP program to them and our GISPs. So the GISCI is actually supported by 4 different geospatial organizations. This list has changed over the years. Most recently, GITA was one of the member organizations, but if you're not aware, GITA recently folded. So right now it's ERISA, NSGIC, AAG, and UCGIS. These folks represent the member organizations, but they don't represent the list of individuals or organizations that we work with. We do work with a lot of different organizations in the geospatial community. We're always looking for new partners. And so we hope to continue to support these organizations, but also perhaps add additional partners or friends in the future. So I want to share some closing thoughts with you as we wrap this up and we move to Q&A session. I'm a member of NSGIC. I'm also a member of ERISA, but NSGIC's been the organization I've spent a lot of my career working with. And we recently did a poll where we asked the state representatives what they thought of the GISP and the GISP program. And one of the individuals came back and said he felt that money would be better spent on beverages. And as you might imagine, that was a little upsetting and it made me a little salty. And so, of course, sometimes it's always good to use those things for motivations. And that's kind of what I've done in this slide. Some folks don't put a lot of value in the program, and that's okay. But what I'll tell you about becoming a GISP is it is an investment. You don't simply just sign a piece of paper and become a GISP. You do have to build your portfolio. That portfolio takes education, it takes experience, and I think most importantly, it takes contributions to the profession. GISPs aren't people that show up, do their work, and go home. They're folks that have a dedicated passion to what they do. They're dedicated to not only the geospatial industry, but they're dedicated to whatever job it is they do that makes things better for folks. So whether it's healthcare, whether it is next generation 911 and routing and dispatching, transportation, natural resource, it doesn't matter. All the GISPs I know are very passionate about what they do and what impact they have. And so getting to this certification takes an investment of time and a financial investment. Maintaining your GISP also requires that investment. Again, it's not an easy thing to do, but if you really believe in what you do, it's actually really not that hard when you think about it, because you're going to get your experience, you're going to get your contribution, you're going to get your education, because that's who you are. You want to be a better person and you want to be a better professional. And so folks in our program really understand that, and they already put those contributions in regardless. And so the GISP recognizes that. If I'm looking at a group of folks for a job and I'm looking to hire somebody, when I see folks with a GISP in their signature, that tells me that they've made a commitment, that they're dedicated to the profession, and that they are indeed a step above their competition. And I'm not sure how many of you know Bill Johnson, former CIO and GIO of New York, now a Carpe Geo evangelist for AppGeo. His quote that I stole from him, and I think really sums it up, is that the GISP is an activity that reinforces behaviors that enrich the profession. And I don't think that can be said any better way than how Bill did it. If anybody asks why you're a GISP, what do you get out of it? To me, that's the answer. You're doing something to enrich the profession. And I would also argue that most GISPs are active in their respective organizations in the community. And so if they're smart, they seek out and find conferences where the beverages are included in the cost of registration. So you don't have to worry about that. With that, I will now open it up to questions and ask Bill Hodge if he has anything he wants to add, so please do so in case I miss something.
I like where you went, and it's really nice to be able to sit back and let somebody else do my talking for me. Thank you.
My pleasure. I stole your slides, so.
Trip, I was watching you earlier and I forgot to comment. You look like a radio talk show host. I keep waiting for you to interject the latest administration comments or an update from Hurricane Ida. You look so official.
Well, thank you. I could bring in my, well, if you can see it over here, my boom mic that I have. Let's see. It's not showing. Yeah, there it is. So well, that's what happens when you run a couple of YouTube channels and try streaming.
Well, did we miss any questions along the way, Trip?
I have not seen any new questions come in. So if anybody has any, I would love to see those come through. I will say this, one of the things that I get asked a lot, especially on the portfolio side, is what kind of things can we count as professional contributions? And, you know, there is a lion list of those things that we can count. And usually folks get very caught up in the cost. Well, it costs to go to a conference. It costs to do this. There are a lot of free to low cost opportunities to earn those professional contribution points. You know, things like what we're doing right here. Doing a presentation such as this online nowadays has become very common. It's not hard to spin one of these up or just be a moderator, right? So we had a question on the ERISA Connect social media outlet about whether being a moderator at the GIS Pro conference would earn you professional contribution points, and it absolutely will. Also, I tell folks that, you know, things like presenting a map or a poster in a gallery at a conference, a lot of times you can submit those. You don't even necessarily have to attend the conference. I encourage you to attend the conference for a multitude of reasons, but just having that there can earn you professional contribution points. So there's a lot of ways. A lot of your local GIS organizations, be they ERISA chapter, user groups or whatnot, you know, they don't charge membership in some cases. So if cost is a concern, and I know it always is, if you get a little creative, it's not hard to earn those professional contribution points. You just got to sometimes think a little bit out of the box.
Absolutely correct. And volunteering is another great way to get contribution points. And we have a lot of folks that do that. And it can be anything from working with the ERISA GIS Corps all the way down to, you know, we have a lot of folks that'll do geospatial analysis for local civic groups like tree planting groups, or, you know, folks that do park maintenance and the like. Even going and teaching a class in your kid's school. Volunteering doesn't cost you anything, and, you know, I would argue volunteering generally, you know, brings you a lot of rewards, not financial rewards, but it brings you a lot of rewards. And so that's one of the best ways to do it. And, you know, getting involved with state councils and local councils and volunteering to help do things like run conferences. I'd tell you right now, having run a lot of conferences, that we are always looking for help. And again, that doesn't cost you anything.
Absolutely.
So speaking of conferences, there are quite a few events coming up on the ERISA calendar that you may want to attend for education. There may be opportunities to present work or moderate or volunteer in other ways. Of course, we have GIS Pro coming up in early October in Baltimore, and we will have the GISP exam prep workshop that will dive a little bit deeper into studying for the exam. We'll have another in-person offering of the GIS Leadership Academy, ERISA's GLA, coming up this November in St. Petersburg. we are having a 3-day virtual addressing conference. We've been a few years since we've had an addressing conference, doing it virtual, talking about addressing and addressing for public safety and enterprise management. There's information on the ERISA website right now about that if you'd like to contribute or pitch an idea in, as well as the group that's working to put that on, another volunteer opportunity. We'll have the Valtech conference also in March. And so a number of opportunities across different opportunities for where you're at in your career in different subject matter areas. And if you've followed ERISA long enough, you'll know that there are always probably about 4 or 5 events coming up. And so we'd encourage you not just to look at it for attending the event, although that's worthwhile, but how can you give back to the profession as part of that event by presenting, by sharing information, or volunteering in other ways.
Yep, very good, Matt. Appreciate that. We did have a question come in and Tony answered it in the chat, but I'll read it out here. So would Python or other coding courses with data camp count as education points? And Tony said, yes, programming courses count. As I've always kind of been led to believe, if you can tie a course back to the GIS&T body of knowledge, one of those multiple knowledge areas, you can count it. The caveat to some of that is at some point, some topics will verge into dedication to other professions. And I'm going to use my own examples. I come from a land surveying background originally. I went to college to be a land surveyor, never was licensed, but when I applied, I was able to count some of my basic surveying courses. So introduction to field data collection, introduction to CAD, and those kind of things I was able to use towards my GISP because they focused on the basics of things like, introduction to CAD, you're drawing points, lines, and polygons. Just because you're using AutoCAD or MicroStation, it doesn't really matter. The same principles apply in ArcGIS, QGIS, and so on. The introduction to surveying course that I took was basic field data collection methods. How do you accurately collect data in the field? Obviously that applies to GIS. Now, when I got into things like route surveying and survey law, those were specific to the surveying profession. So I wasn't allowed to count those because that was surveying stuff and we're trying to do GIS stuff. So, if you can tie it back to the GIS&T body of knowledge and it's not focused more on another profession, I think that's a good guideline to kind of follow on whether you can count something for education points or not. Tony, Bill, would y'all agree with that, Matt?
Yes, that's a perfect assessment of what I've seen. One more comment in terms of the Lions list that you talked about a moment ago, that we find individuals who will use any or all of those areas at some point. But I've seen over my career with GISCI, when it comes to recertifying applications, the majority of the GISPs use association memberships and user groups for the contributions. That's the lion's share, the gift that keeps on giving that they come back through with. So keep that in mind if you're a first timer coming through. Do something now that will contribute on a continuing basis after you get your GISP and keep moving forward.
Very good, Bill. Does anybody have any other questions? So one of the other things that I've seen folks have problems with on the application side is when you start looking at your experience. And we already had the question about the 4-year FTE. But when you're going through and you're trying to put your experience in, we have that tiered structure, right? You have a tier 1 level activity versus tier 2 versus tier 3 level activities. I find a lot of folks kind of get confused by that. So one of the things I tell folks is you've got to kind of look at what, you were doing during that whole time frame. And it's, for example, I worked at a company for 18 and a half years. And so I was a GIS tech and a surveying tech kind of at the same time, right? So how do I split those things up? It's not unusual for you to, in a given position, not necessarily have a 100% FTE in GIS, full-time equivalency. So you've got to kind of judge how much were you doing true GIS during the time frame you were in that position. So when I was a survey tech and a GIS tech at the same time, I split my time up, and I was actually probably only doing 30% GIS. The rest was actually traditional field tech surveying, boundary surveys, topos, those things. So I only had that 40% FTE in GIS, and then I had to take that 40% and divide it in those tier 2 and 3 level activities. As you're writing those up, I encourage you to look at the descriptions for each of those tiers. And as you're describing what you did, try to incorporate the same kind of wording that's in those tiers for activities, so that when whoever's reviewing your application, whether it's myself, Bill, Tony, Matt, whoever is, got that job, we can easily look at and understand what you do. Because keep in mind, GIS is very diverse. I'm very good at land records management and utilities. I'm not necessarily good on epidemiology or environmental analysis per se. So I need to be able to understand what you did as I'm reviewing that. So just keep that in mind too, as you're writing up your descriptions in your work experience, that the person reviewing that may not be from the same field you are. We're all GISPs, we all do GIS work, but our perspectives are going to be definitely a bit different. So I'd like to throw that out there.
And one thing I'll throw up that's semi-related to this, when you're filling out your portfolio for the first time, you need 150 points. That's all you need. Once you hit each section, you can stop entering information. You don't have to give a complete rundown of every job you did and everything that you did. And so if you can get your experience points with your first job and not have to deal with trying to put together the part-time pieces, that's absolutely fine. We don't expect you to put down everything that you've done. And some people actually will put everything in there because they use it as a kind of a resume. You can use your portfolio as a resume if you'd like, but we encourage folks to get to the minimum and then go ahead and stop.
I'll tell you, that's a good point, because a lot of folks do tend to get a bit overwhelmed when they're doing the portfolio. If they are like us, that are a little bit senior in the profession, and we're thinking we got to document 20 years or more worth of activity. No, I always tell folks, start your most current, work your way back till you get to the points you need. I always suggest going a little bit over, just because some of the review is a little bit subjective. So you go, if 150 is what you need, go to 180, but stop. I remember when we were still doing the paper applications, and they'd send us the PDFs to review, and those things would be 300 pages long, and somebody would have 1,000 points in there. And I'm like, I've got a life. I'm going to go through, and once I know you've met all the minimums, I stop. As I tell folks, there's no such thing as the super GISP because you have more points than anybody else. So try to keep that in mind as you're filling that portfolio out.
Trip, I'd encourage that. What I try to tell people is keep it simple. I remind them that we've probably been reviewing applications longer than any of them have had a particular job, and I suspect we know their job better than they do. Don't overthink it. The portfolio is the least of your problems. The exam is going to determine whether or not you become a GISP. That's really where things sit on the cutting board.
So absolutely. And there's something else I want to mention. I don't think that, two things I want to mention. First, talk about the exam. The practice exam that's now available is a great tool to determine your weaknesses, but do not think you sit through that practice exam and you blow it out of the water, that suddenly means you're going to ace the real exam. I have multiple certifications, GISP being one of those, but I'm also Microsoft certified, Esri certified. I was a certified floodplain. I've taken a lot of these exams, And in most cases, the practice exam is not a complete reflection of the real exam. So don't rest on your laurels there. Make sure you do study. The other part, going back to the work experience in the application, and I'm not sure, Tony, I didn't hear this. Maybe you mentioned it, I missed it, but the supervisor bonus. So you do get bonus points under experience for being a supervisor. This is a way that we account for the fact that as you move up the chain from technician to analyst, specialist, manager, coordinator, and so on, that you probably do less and less true technical GIS work, and you're doing more things like project management, HR, people management, budgeting, and all these other things. So you will get a bonus when you move into that managerial role.
And Trip, I'll confirm or add on to that. Supervision is of staff, not of technical components.
Yep. Very good. Do we have any other question? I'm not sure. Is this supposed to, I think 4 o'clock is when we're supposed to finish up.
Yep. So we're getting close to the end, and I know that some questions have been asked, and there were many questions answered during the presentation and the follow-up discussion. So would like to thank Tony and Bill and Trip for helping us out today and sharing their knowledge and information and background about GISCI and what's involved in the process to become a GISP. Tony put his email address in the chat, and you can find that on the GISCI website. And so if there are questions about the process or the details, or hey, I'm not quite sure how to put this in, Tony is probably the best person to tackle those questions. But there are a wealth of other folks that have been involved, and Bill is Bill is pointing to
You know who to talk to.
That can help give guidance, point you to resources. The GISP community on ERISA Connect is another great resource. And reaching out to your contacts. You probably know several GISPs, and you probably know several that have gone through the process. You probably know several that have taken the exam that might be useful for you as well. So on that note, thank you all for your attendance and interest. Tony, Bill, Trip, thank you for your time and sharing your knowledge. And we will catch up with all of you somewhere down the road, virtually or in person or both in the future. So have a great afternoon, everyone.
Take care, everyone.
Bye, everybody.